Hello, my name is Shayna Daubert, Director of Kenyon's 50th Reunion Program. I would like to welcome you to the Kenyon Bookstore for your Never Too Old to Read children's books, led by Charlie Otting and joined by his Kenyon classmate and fellow teacher, Paula Barone. I would like to thank Paula and Sam Barone for coordinating this event. Thank you to the bookstore for hosting, and the class of 1972 50th Reunion Committee for sponsoring this evening. 1972 is preparing to celebrate an important milestone as they near their 50th reunion in May. On the committee's behalf, I would like to encourage anyone who has an upcoming reunion to join them in Gambier on May 26th through the 29th for reunion weekend. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. Everyone will be muted during the session to maintain the quality of the sound during the presentation. We will be recording this session to share it with anyone who is unable to join. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the chat, or if you submitted a question before the event, we will leave time at the end to answer questions. Also, thanks to the bookstore, most of Charlie's books that he will be highlighting will be available to order on their website. I will share the list of books available and link to order in a follow-up email for you tomorrow. Now I would like to introduce Charlie Otting, member of the class of 1972, married to alumni and retired faculty member Miriam Dean Otting, as well as the parent of two sons who are Kenyon alumni. After Kenyon, Charlie received his master's degree in classics and taught classics for a few years. He then decided to go back to school to receive his master's degree in elementary education from Bank Street College of Education in New York City. During his 28-year career in education, he was an elementary teacher, literacy coach, and reading intervention specialist. Before he retired, his last placement was in Gambier at Wigan Street Elementary School. Charlie, we look forward to hearing your expertise as you review and recommend a range of children's literature from picture books to graphic novels. Thank you for joining us, and now I will turn it over to you and Paula.
Yo!
Yes?
Hey!
Who?
You!
Me?
Yes, you!
Oh.
What's up?
Not much.
Why?
No fun.
Oh?
No friends.
Oh.
Yes.
Look!
Hmm?
Me!
You?
Yes, me!
You?
Well?
Well. Yes.
Yo!
Yes.
Yow!
So this is by one of my favorites, Chris Rashka, illustrator. He's wonderful. I recommend all of his stuff. I want to welcome everybody, thank everybody for tuning in tonight, especially my classmates from the class of 72, who should already be in their pajamas with a nice glass of wine based on last month's recommendations. So I hope you're all doing that right now. I'm looking forward to sharing titles with you and talking about reading and children's books. So here we are.
Thanks for doing this, Charlie. Really appreciate it. And I think it would be good to start off with maybe what your journey was to elementary education.
Sure. So our first child was born in 1981. And like many parents, we started reading to him quite early on. And it was really my first experience with children's books. I didn't remember reading children's books as a kid. I mostly read sports biographies whenever I had to do a book report for school. But I don't really have much memory of children's books per se. So we started reading them, and it was eye-opening to me how beautiful and complex a children's book could be. I guess I thought of them as maybe some kind of childish thing, but they were really just wonderful. When my kids learned how to read, we continued reading to them. But after a certain point, of course, they didn't want to have any more of that. So I found myself, I kept reading children's books because I enjoyed it so much. And at some point, I decided that I would like to do this as a kind of career. So that headed me towards getting a degree in elementary ed because I thought this would be really fun to be able to read children's books with kids and talk about them and help them become better readers. So that's kind of what I did.
Great. Thanks.
So,
Thanks for sharing that
Yeah.
with us.
So I wanted to begin tonight with a book about Halloween, and it's this one here, and it's called A Tiger Called Thomas by Charlotte Zolatel, who wrote this originally back in the 60s with the boy, Thomas, as a white kid. It was redone later with Thomas becoming an African-American kid. There he is right here. And then it was done a few years ago with Thomas changing his name to Tomas as a Latinx kid. And I think it's a good example of how children's books over the decades have become much more diverse in response to kids wanting to see themselves in children's books. And so publishers have started to do this much more. The other thing about this book that I love is that it's not just about Halloween. It is about Halloween, but it's also about this really shy kid and how he's new to a community. He doesn't think anybody's going to like him. And yet when he goes around at Halloween in his costume, everybody says, "Hi, Thomas." And he's wondering, how do they know me? And he realizes that everybody really loves him by the end of the book. So this is a great book to get. Look for the other one too, with a new illustrator called A Tiger Called Tomas.
Okay.
So.
And then we noticed in the list of books that you kindly assembled for us ahead of time that many of the topics of the books probably would appeal to people of our era, that many of them touched upon things that happened during the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, I especially looked for books that I thought might have some connection to our class, who we were kids in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and the issues that were swirling around us as students were Vietnam, the civil rights movement especially. So I wanted to draw on a few books that talk about that. So you want to hold that one up, Paula?
Sure.
This one is called The Wall, and it's about the Vietnam Wall, the Vietnam Memorial Wall. It's by Eve Bunting, who is a really prolific children's author who's still writing. I think she's in her 90s now, but she's still writing books. She writes really wonderful contemporary books about issues that are important to families and kids right now. So look for her books. It's Eve Bunting. It's let me just show one picture from it. It's a really moving book. When I was telling Paula and Sam, when I reread it this week, I really teared up. It's so well done. This is a picture of a father and his son looking for the name of his father and grandfather. And they notice this man who comes up in a wheelchair. So it's just a really, really powerful, touching book. And why don't you show that one, Paula? This
Sure.
one is by the author of the creator of the Vietnam Memorial, Maya Lin. And it's a story about her life, including her growing up as a kid in Athens, Ohio, and how she got interested in art through her family, and how she was chosen to be the designer of the Vietnam Memorial, which is a remarkable story. So I recommend this book. I don't know if it's on the list, but I will maybe send the name to Shayna so she can add it to the list for you all. And finally, concerning Vietnam, this kind of brings the story full circle. This is by a Vietnamese refugee storyteller whose name I will try to pronounce is Muon T. Van, who fled with his family, I think in the late 70s, because his father had worked for the wrong side with the Vietnamese army, who was on the losing side.
Mhm.
And he produced this really, really beautiful but powerful story of immigration. I just wanted to share a few lines with it. Each page starts like this. It's called Wishes, but each page starts with this refrain: the night wished it was quieter. The bag wished it was deeper. The light wished it was brighter. So it's really poignant. It's almost as if the whole world is sympathizing with this family that is fleeing Vietnam. So this is a really wonderful book, very recent. You can find this in your local indie bookstore or through Kenyon if you want to follow that link that Shayna is going to provide to the Kenyon bookstore.
And Charlie, just to diverge a little bit
Yeah.
at this moment, I know that you're passionate about people of all ages reading
I am.
children's books, and that one was so beautifully written that maybe that's a segue into a little talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just reading, as many of you who are grandparents or parents have figured out already, reading with your child is one of the most beautiful things you can do. It creates this amazing intimacy where you can have conversations about really difficult topics, such as, refugees, for people who have to leave their country for some reason. And I think children's books nowadays, especially, but I think in the past, authors are not afraid to take on really challenging topics,
Mhm.
and yet do them in such a way that children can process them and understand them. And so it's a very complicated kind of creation. I think it takes a really skilled writer to be able to do that well. So, when I continued reading children's books, I would just bring home a stack of picture books from the library, and just every week I would just read them and do the same thing the next week and the next week. And it was kind of like snacking for me. It was like eating potato, eat another one, eat another one. And so if you're unfamiliar with picture books, go to the library and see what's there and bring some home. I really recommend it. It's the other thing I wanted to say about picture books is that you can't listen to them on your phone. You have to have them in front of you, sitting comfortably, maybe with a little kid, and that's the best way to experience them. So.
Okay, and then in keeping with the theme of ideas that might resonate with the class of 72, perhaps this.
Yeah, that's a good one to go to. So This is by a woman named Deborah Wiles, writes lots of books, both picture books and kind of not exactly young adult novels, but some people distinguish young adult from middle grade, kind of middle school kind of novels. And she's actually written a trilogy about the 60s. The first one is called Countdown. It's about, remember when the space program got started and we were taught, and then there was fear of nuclear attacks, and kids in my school were taught how to get under their desk, in case there was a nuclear attack, as if that would have helped at all. But we were taught, we practiced that. We had these drills where we would get under our desks. She's also written, her most recent book is about Kent State. And it's really interesting how she does it. It's not a novel per se, it's more of a compilation of different voices all around the story of Kent State that she tries to put together. We're now 20, not 20, 50 years or so after Kent State. So I really recommend her trilogy as well as this most recent book of hers.
And another topic of the 60s and 70s was the civil rights movement. And so I think we have
I have a couple titles I picked out for that. There are so many really great books about the civil rights movement, about the Jim Crow South, about families coming north, about what it was like to live under Jim Crow. And we live in a time when some people are actively trying to censor these kinds of books. They don't want families, they don't want parents, they don't want kids to be reading about the civil rights movement. It's happening. I've read about it almost every day. There's stories in the news about it. So I think it's really important for families to almost go out of their way to look for these kinds of books. Fortunately, there's lots of great ones out there. This is book one of John Lewis's memoir, his trilogy of his own involvement in the civil rights movement. It's a what they call graphic novel, even though it's not a novel. It's kind of a confusing term that gets used, but it's a graphic memoir of his time, and it's really powerful and beautiful. So I recommend that one. This is kind of the civil rights movement on the large scale with the big events that were happening. I chose another one, and Paul, you might want to just open that to a page and I can talk about it. This one is about a mother and her daughter going fishing, and it's also during the Jim Crow era, and they meet or they see a father and his son who are white, and they have kind of this interesting encounter that's somewhat disturbing and painful to the little girl and her mom. But on her own, in the story, the little girl decides to reach out to the boy and does so. And so there's kind of a glimmer of hope at the end of this story that, maybe these two kids can get to know each other a little better. Maybe not the parents, but maybe the kids. So it's a really quite a beautiful story. It's called Fishing. I didn't give you the title. I think it's on my list. It's called Fishing Day by Andrea Davis Pinkney. So, okay.
And
how are we doing with time? Are you keeping an eye on that?
let me see here. Oh, we're doing fine.
Good. Okay.
We've got 7:20, so
Great.
we've got
Okay.
some time left. Okay, and then you mentioned that sadly, in recent years, we've had several amazing authors,
Mhm.
well-known authors, who have passed away, and some of your favorites.
Yeah. Just this past year or so, we've lost quite a number of really famous authors. Some of them people out there will know. Beverly Cleary. Beverly Cleary, who's the author of the Ramona books, among others, died. She was about 100 and over 100 who
Right.
died recently.
Right.
We lost Eric Carle. Everybody knows about Eric Carle and the Hungry Caterpillar. We lost Tommy de Paola, famous for the Stregonona books and many, many others. He did some really wonderful memoirs of his childhood also that I recommend. I think most people know the Italian kind of fable books, but if you look for his memoirs, they're really, really great. Let's see, who else did I want to mention? I wanted to mention two in particular that I brought examples of for you tonight. And one is Gary Paulson, who is one of my all-time favorite children's authors. Many families will know him because of his book called Hatchet, which is kind of a standard 5th grade or so adventure story about a boy who gets stranded after a plane crash. And it's really a great book. This one is the one I chose to share with you tonight, called The Rifle. And it's about, let me wipe my nose a bit here. It is about a rifle, but it's done in a really interesting way. It tells the story of a particular rifle that was created in the 1700s, and it really goes into the craftsmanship of making this gun. The gun then gets passed on over the generations and sold and changes hands into, the contemporary setting. And then, of course, there's a tragic accident. So the book really, without directly addressing the whole notion of gun violence and gun control, et cetera, sort of presents through a different angle in a way that I think is really remarkable. It would be a great book to read together with older kids, perhaps, to talk about guns, which are still such a big part of our society. So look for that book, and look for any Gary Paulson book. He's just really one of the best. So I really like him. Okay, I'll put that one down here for you, Paula. The other author is mostly known as an illustrator, although she writes her books too. Her name is Lois Ealert, we think is how she pronounces her name. She died this year also. This is a great book. I think it's her last book. It would be great for families because it talks about how she became an artist, how she learned to use different materials. She uses paper. She does collages and paper cutouts, or however you say that as an artist. Really beautiful work. And this book is a kind of story of her life and how she went about it. And if you have kids and grandkids, this would be a perfect book to share with them or to give to them so that they could do. She's the kind of artist who just invites you to try what she's doing. And she actually encourages that kind of thing. So it would be a great gift for kids in that regard.
People would know Chicka Chicka Boom Boom.
Yes.
And this is that same.
She's the illustrator of that.
Yeah.
So speaking of Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, this is by that author, Bill Martin Jr. It's called 10 Little Caterpillars. She's the illustrator. And I chose it just because any page I open to just is spectacular. So I'm just going to do that just to show you what she does. So there's one.
Wow.
And it's really stunning what she does with paper. And paper that she has colored and collected and designed. So Lois Ealert, look for her. She would be a great person to investigate further. And then there's one other illustrator named Steve Jenkins, who writes many books about animals. And he's also a collage paper artist. This one is called Bones. And it's pretty spectacular when you take a close look at it to see what he has done with different kinds of paper. He's done lots and lots of books about animals, so any of his books, I think, would be a really great gift. Okay.
Okay. So then I noticed in looking through the titles that you shared with us that there was also kind of strong references to nature
Yes.
and animals, and so I guess the Bones book would fit into
Yeah.
that, and maybe segue into some of the other ones that
Yeah,
you've.
which I have down here.
Oh, okay.
I didn't pull them out yet, but talking about animals, I want to put a plug in for this book. This is by a 96 grad named Eric Newman. It's a really delightful story about puffins in Iceland. Apparently, the parents at some point of puffins just decide it's time to go off and leave their little ones behind. And the little puffins sometimes struggle to find their way back to where they need to go. And the children on this particular island have been taught how to rescue them. So it's a great story about children rescuing puffins and then taking them to the animal protection place, and they check them out and then they release them. So this is by Eric Newman, and he has this organization called, I got it right here, it's called Iceland with Kids. So if you look that up on Google, you can order this book directly from Eric and even have it signed by him if you'd like. So I really recommend this book.
There was an amazing number of puffins that were rescued, like many thousands by children.
Yeah, it's really a great story. I've chosen out of many great nature books, 3 that I really like. This one is a very recent book called Outside In. And the title is kind of intriguing. It's really about getting outside, but it's also about how the outside comes in to your house. Light comes in through the window, the breeze comes in, how it's almost inviting you to get back outside. I think Sam wants us to hold it a little bit like that, more vertical.
There we go.
So it's a kind of picture book that just uses a minimal number of words, but captures a really beautiful concept about nature that I think is just really great. And the illustrations I think are just fantastic illustrations.
And the illustrations look like they're watercolor.
Yes.
It looks like a lot of wet on wet, which really.
Yes, sometimes when I look at these books, I just want to come up to the Kenyon bookstore and get some watercolor.
Yes.
I mean, I do. I really say, I want to do that. It's so beautiful. So that's one. And this is on my list. It's by Deborah Underwood and illustrated by Cindy Derby, I think is her name.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful one.
Another one I chose to share with you is called Because of an Acorn. And it's kind of one of these, I don't know what the name is, but it's a kind of a cumulative book, like, what am I thinking of? This is the House That Jack Built kind of book, where each thing gets built on like that. So this is called Because of an Acorn. I'll just show you a few pages. Because of an acorn, a tree. Because of a tree, a bird. Because of a bird, a seed, etc. So simple in some ways, but complex in other ways. And it goes through the whole cycle and comes back to the beginning of the tree growing, and then the new acorn comes on. That's by Lola Schaefer. That I think is on my list. I'll make sure it is if it's not.
Beautiful.
The last one is also a fairly recent book called Sidewalk Flowers. It's It's a wordless book. There's some really kind of remarkable wordless books. Like, how do you tell a story without words? You have to really think about things, and you have to have a really amazing illustrator. This illustrator is Sydney Smith, and John Arno Lawson is the creator of the whole book, I think. It's basically about this father and daughter who are taking a walk, and this little girl keeps noticing wildflowers along the route. The father, meantime, is usually checking his phone or not paying any attention to anything. She spends the whole time collecting flowers, and then she starts doing things with a flower. Let me just show you one thing she does with the flowers.
This is kind of like a graphic novel.
Yeah,
so-
it is like a graphic novel in a way. Let me see. So she comes across a bird that has died, and so she puts a little wreath, in a sense, on the dead
Wow.
bird. And so she does this through the book, and the father continues to be not paying attention. So it's a book about kind of noticing things, paying attention without any words whatsoever. It's a really great story. So that's that one.
Very nice.
Ah,
Okay.
how we doing?
And well, we're doing fine.
Good.
It's 7:32.
Okay.
So we're doing well.
Okay.
So then, would you like to take a question before you
I
start?
could, yeah,
Okay.
sure.
This is a question from someone out there. Is there an organization working with children and reading that Charlie could recommend we support?
Ah, that's a good question. Let me think about that and maybe get something to Shayna.
Is the IRA still in existence, the International Reading Association?
It's now the ILA because
Okay.
they eventually gave up being called the IRA. They did, it's true.
I wonder why.
Yeah. So then now they're the ILA, which is more a professional organization for teachers. There are some organizations that I'm sure that I could find out about, and I'll get that to Shayna.
Of course, Dolly Parton is
Yeah.
doing amazing things.
Yeah,
with
Dolly Parton's organization is fabulous, and that's done through local, what is it called?
philanthropic.
Well, I mean,
right.
in our county, what is the organization called?
Oh, United Way.
United Way is what I mean. United Way,
Mm-hmm.
I think that comes in through United Way, and that's an excellent, I don't know if you can give donations to that group, but I know there are some, and I just don't know any off the top of my head right now.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'll think about that. Good question, though.
That is a good question. Okay, so did you want to talk
Yeah,
about
let's
some
talk
young
about that.
adult?
Yes. Yeah.
There were several on your list.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of show the end of the range of children's books. You know, the terminology is kind of confusing nowadays, and I don't think it's really matters a great deal to worry about it, but people do use the term YA for young adult, which I think tends to be like 14-year-old and up, but who knows? I mean, some kids read, you know, some younger kids read books that are young adult, and so it's as a parent, I guess you have to do a little homework on a book if you're going to share it with a younger kid. So that's always a good thing. One rule of thumb I've always used is if you know the age of one of the kids in the book, the protagonist, that's kind of a good, more or less, good guide for you.
Okay.
When you get into the teen years, however, issues, you know, can come up that are really adult issues about all kinds of things that, you know, you have to use your own judgment about, I think.
Right.
But
Right.
children's literature, as I said before, takes on really difficult topics, you know, poverty and homelessness and et cetera. And so even younger books for younger kids can be emotionally weighty books.
Yes.
That's why it's good if you can read with a child as much as possible, especially books that you can share together like that. So
Mhm.
I chose a few young adult books, partly because I want to get the names of the authors out there. This one is it's called All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kylie. Both of them are amazing. Jason Reynolds, I think, is currently a kind of ambassador for young people's literature. So he goes around and does a lot of school visits. He writes a lot about the urban Black experience. This book came out after Ferguson. It deals with, police harassment, and it's a story of a white kid and a Black kid and how their experiences are very different. So Jason Reynolds, look for his stuff. It's really just amazing. Another African-American author you might have heard of is Jacqueline Woodson. This is her verse memoir. It's called Brown Girl Dreaming. Whole thing is done in poetry. She writes really, really great books, picture books, as well as young adult books. So anything she does, look for Jacqueline Woodson. She also has been a kind of children's literature ambassador, I think, in the past. And finally, the last one I chose is by an author named Avi. He goes just by that name, Avi. I think I found out why he's called Avi. It's because, and I forget his actual birth name, but I think his sister, when he was little, called him Avi. He kept it, he liked it, and he kept that name. He's written maybe 70 or 80 novels by now, still writing. This is one of his more recent ones. It's called Old Wolf, and it's a story of a wolf pack on the one hand, where the leader of the wolf pack is being challenged by the younger wolves. And it's about a 13-year-old boy who has just been given a bow for his birthday. So you have these two stories that are eventually going to kind of come together in some climactic moment, and they're sort of done in alternating chapters. So Avi he's an award-winning author. I really like him. Some of his books are still read and kind of regular part of the reading curriculum in elementary schools. So that's Avi.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if we should stop for questions. I have, as you can see, my bag is overflowing. I could talk about more books, but if there's any questions out there.
Do a few more and we'll invite questions.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I have to laugh a little bit because who prepares for a talk the day of the talk, right? You don't do that, do you? Well, here I was at the library today and I find this book called The Night Walk. And I said, I have to share this book tonight. It's a picture book. It's a new picture book. It's by a French artist. And it's absolutely spectacularly beautiful book about a family that takes a night walk in the middle of the night. And just look how the illustrator does the lighting here. It's really amazing.
Oh my God.
They pass they pass the hotel in town before they go out of town. I mean, look at that little detail, the boy standing in the kind of the shadow of the window. And eventually they come to a hilltop. There's the moon on the lake that they're looking at. They eventually come to a hilltop where they wait for sunrise to come.
Wow.
So it's a great story about just a simple thing, a family wanting to go for a walk together at night.
Beautifully illustrated.
It's really spectacular picture book, I think. So anyway, I found that today. Just late. Question or?
Yes.
Yeah. So that gives me, I've already mentioned Eric Newman, author from Kenyon. Joe Slate was a art professor here at Kenyon, and anybody else can join in to help me here. And he wrote a children's book about kindergarten that was incredibly successful and influential. And I don't know how many picture books Joe did, but that was one that I really knew
Mrs.
about.
Bindergarten's
Mrs.
kindergarten.
Bindergarten, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Talking of young adult authors, there's of course Kenyon's own John Green, The Fault in Our Stars, among other books, and there's probably they're on the shelf over here, Ransom Rig series.
Right.
So Kenyon, I'd love to know about more Kenyon children's authors. So if you're out there, send an email to me. I'd love to know about your books.
Yes.
And those are just, I mean, I guess I could even go back further to Bill Watterson, who created the Calvin and Hobbes books. Those are sort of early graphic novels in a way. I mean, they're more in the tradition of traditional comics, but
Right.
and I'll tell you, those books are still being avidly read by kids today, especially kids who are not liking reading so much. And you give them a Calvin and Hobbes, and they just take off as readers. It's really great. So to see that.
Charlie, I see, not to put you on the spot, but I see one of the books from your list, Show Me a Sign, right there behind you. Is that something you could tell us a little?
Yeah, this one was one I was going to recommend. It's just a fascinating setting and story. It takes place in the early part of the 19th century on Martha's Vineyard, and it's about a community of deaf people. And a doctor comes to investigate, well, why are all these deaf people living on this island? There's also native peoples living there, and they're having to kind of interact with them. So this is a brand new book. It's rare in the sense that the writer herself is deaf. There aren't a lot of books like this. So, you know, these books about folks with these kind of disabilities, and that's not the right word nowadays, but it's a really great book. I recommend this one. And I have to remember to put it back on the shelf and not be caught as I leave the bookstore and arrested on my.
The alarm went off.
Right.
So, Charlie, there are a few questions
Yep.
here and just some comments as
Sure.
well, which might be interesting to tack onto. One from Marita Bath Shine.
Marita. Hi, Marita.
Mentioning that local fundraising chapters of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library always welcome support.
Oh, great.
And we actually have family experience with some of the holes in the Imagination Library. For example, Orlando, Florida, if there's anybody out there from Orlando that would like to support one there, they do not have one.
So you mean when they don't have one, you can help get one started?
Right, you can help
good.
get one
Great
started.
idea.
And then, let's see, someone's mentioning, Rick Ripley mentioned Joe Slate, and we just mentioned him. Anna Barone Jarzak asks, can you recommend any books for young readers that discuss people with exceptionalities? And so that was just one that you just did.
That one, and I thought I showed it to you before. I'm not sure where it got one. This is a recent graphic novel called New Kid by Jerry Craft, and that kind of addresses those kids who show up at school with, you know, unusual talents, but are also considered to be, you know, they struggle in school, but yet their skills, their talents are not appreciated. And this is a story about one of those kids called New Kid, Jerry Craft. It's a really, really great graphic novel. So that would be one. In there, I think I could come up with some other titles, and
And
I know where you live. So I can get them to you.
And I think specifically the exceptionality of autism might be something that would be interesting.
I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. There are some really good ones, but I can't. think of titles, but I will get them to you. So,
Okay.
great.
Then also, Marita, your friend Marita, says that Mrs. Bindergarten was illustrated by Ashley Wolf, who is a Vermonter, worth checking out.
Okay, Ashley Wolf.
Ashley
All right.
Wolf. Okay. This is an interesting question. If you were recommending picture books to someone who hadn't ever read them, which would you recommend to start?
Okay, Jane Yolen is the author. Al Moon, I would start there.
Oh,
So it's about, again, it's about a father and daughter, I think it is, who go out
Night Walk.
to take a walk at night to hear the owls. And it's beautiful illustrations. Jane Yolen is crazily prolific. She's written hundreds and is still writing children's books, hundreds of children's books. Al Moon is one of her real gems. So I would recommend start there. Go to look for Al Moon. It's in the library or wherever.
Okay. And Susan McGannon from our class says, have you read or do you recommend How to Raise a Reader by New York Times writers? I just read an article about it and was curious.
Yeah, there's several books like that. I'm not sure which one. There's been a lot going on in the last couple of years. A kind of a big debate about teaching reading, and this happens all the time, every few decades. But recently, there's been a lot of talk about this thing called the science of reading, which is really saying we have to get back to basics and phonics, and so there's that debate going on right now. And I don't know how this particular book fits into it. I'm more of a holistic approach person to reading, but I try to listen to both sides as carefully as I can. But I don't know that particular book, but I will look into it again. What's the name of it again?
How to Raise a Reader.
Yeah.
Right.
So
okay,
good question.
This is from Rachel Cohn. Also, what do you think makes a children's book resonate with readers?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, what books that resonate with kids are different from books that resonate with me, with adults. Like kids love the Captain Underpants books by Dave Pilkey. They absolutely love them. They love the what's the other series that's really, there's another, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is another one. I've read a little bit of them. Do I love them? I don't really love them, but the kids love them. And they have the great advantage of being ongoing. It's a series, so you can just go, when's the next one coming out? I'm going to read. They get really excited about it.
Right.
That's such a large question. What makes it appealing to a reader? I think it depends. It's different for every reader. I love not really good artwork. I also like poetic language, and so a good question though. I don't think I did it justice.
Well, it's a huge question.
It is. Yeah.
People probably have done PhD studies on that. So let's see. Anna says, thanks for helping with holiday shopping. And Richard Ripley says, Timmy Failure books are also popular.
Okay, I don't know about those.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a new one
Timmy
to me
Failure.
too.
Yeah.
So, are there other young adult books that you'd like to share with us, and as we wait for perhaps more questions? Or
Yeah, I do have a few right here. Nobody asked my favorite children's author, nor my favorite children's book.
let's ask that.
And I'm going to go to it right now. My favorite author is named Paul Fleischman, whose dad was also an author named Sid Fleischman. Paul Fleischman is amazingly diverse in his writing. He writes picture books. He writes young adult books. I brought one just to show you. It's a kind of, it's a kind of graphic
Oh, wow.
novel. It's called Dateline Troy. He retells the story of the Trojan War, and he juxtaposes headlines from newspapers on the other side. So, boy, talk
Wow.
about a great book to share with young kids,
Wow.
especially middle school kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic. Like, you know, the part about, you know, the origins of the Trojan War, and so there's a lot about war. There's a lot about beauty pageants, because that sort of started the Trojan War, you know, the discussion of who's the most beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just one example of one of his great books. It's called Dateline Troy. You know, when you find his name, you will find other ones. He did another one about the Civil War called Bull Run, which tells the story of Bull Run with lots of different voices, both sides of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more time.
I think we do
Okay.
have some more time. I was thinking when you shared the book by Avi,
Yes.
that's if kids are interested in historical fiction, there are a lot of Avi books that would fall into that.
There are a lot. Yeah.
category.
He writes a lot of historical fiction. Yeah.
So
This is the one we shared before we got
Yes.
started. This is by Her Left Foot. It's by Dave Eggers, who writes a lot of adult novels. His most recent novels are about social media companies. The Circle is one, and there's another one that came out just recently. They're really, I don't know if I'm going to say fun to read, but they're really insightful about social media, Google, Facebook, which is now called Meta. I learned today it's called Meta. It's true.
Really?
Yes, they changed the name of Facebook today.
Wow.
Anyway, so it's called Her Right Foot. It's about the Statue of Liberty, and it tells how the statue was created. But I hope you're wondering, why is it called Her Right Foot? Well, as you get to the end of the book, he talks about how people don't always notice that her right foot is lifted up as if she's on the move. And he talks about how, you know, we need to keep moving to make things better for people, to help new immigrants, that it's just not a static thing. Freedom is not static, it's active. And so that's kind of the message of this book. Quite fun to read. So how are we doing?
Richard Ripley says there's go to timmyfailure.com.
Okay.
timmyfailure.com. And he says, thank you very much, Charlie. Sorry I have to go. See you at the reunion. Happy Halloween.
Thanks for showing up.
And I think the front of the book really
Yeah, it shows
illustrates the
Yeah.
foot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
We have maybe time to talk about one more young adult
let me talk about
book or
5
a
minutes?
picture book of your
Okay.
choice.
Let me talk about a writer named Kate D Camillo.
Mm.
You may know of her books from The Tale of Despero, for example, was one of her famous books. She has a new book out called The Beatrice Prophecy, set in the Middle Ages. Really, really a great book. She's one of my favorite authors. I'd really recommend Kate D. Camillo books.
Okay.
She wrote a book called Because of Winn-Dixie. What are some of her other young adult, middle grade novels? She's really good.
And there's the picture
Yeah.
of the Beatrice.
Beatrice,
Prophecy.
yeah.
Okay.
Trying to think of. Again, I think I would recommend to folks who are listening to, if you've never done it, do go to your children's section in your library. And often libraries will set up the new books like this. You know, you don't even have to get down and poke around. You can just grab them off the top, the ones that appeal to you. And I choose books by ones that I have some immediate response to, I guess. I guess that's what I would.
And I noticed
recommend.
several of the books that you shared were Newbery or Caldecott
Yes.
or honor books.
Many of them are honored books, yes.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And oh, could you talk about, I'm sorry, I had a hard time understanding what this
Okay.
meant. Books in a time of device popularity,
Okay, meaning,
meaning
How-
an iPad or a,
I see, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I talked about that before a little bit. Picture books have to be experienced, I think, as a physical object, you know. Young adult books don't necessarily have to be, you know, people are going to listen to them on their headsets or their phone, whatever. But a picture book, I think, especially, and even books for younger kids like board books, and there's some wonderful board books back here. Those are meant to be tactile, I think, objects. So
Right.
I know that that's a whole big issue for a lot of families, you know, screen time with kids. And I know somebody out there is going to say, okay, boomer. So maybe I should just stop right there. So,
Well, before we go, we want to say thank you to some folks that
Sure.
helped out here, Heather Peterson and Mark Toole, who's over here, who helped get in many of the titles that you had
Yes.
suggested. Skip Trask, who's working on the cameras, and Shayna Daubert in her whole office. But then
and Sam Barone.
and Sam, thanks for helping. And Rachel Cohn says to everyone, speaking of favorites, what is your favorite Kenyan memory?
Favorite Kenyan memory. Wow. I do have really strong memories of the aftermath of Kent State. It wasn't a fun time, but it left a really big impact on me, how the campus responded and
Right,
how we had these amazing gatherings in Ross Hall.
right.
Yeah.
Right. For me, we talked about him a little bit before. It was Joe Slate. He was gone my junior year, I think, on sabbatical.
Because you majored in art.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't meet him until my senior year, but so wonderful, an amazing man.
Yeah.
So many talents. Yes.
I didn't mention my favorite children's book.
Yes.
I will.
Go for it, Charlie.
It's called Tuck Everlasting.
Oh,
It's an older
yes.
book.
Yes.
It's by Natalie Babbitt. And I read it probably every couple of years. I just think it's a perfect book. You can't take one word out of that book.
Right.
It's just amazing. So
And
Tuck Everlasting, go find it
Yes.
and read it.
it is an amazing.
Yeah.
It gives you a lot to think about.
It does. It's a very
And it's a
thought-provoking book.
thin little book,
Yeah,
but with big ideas.
big ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We okay?
I think we're.
Wrap it up.
Good.
I-
Okay, wrap it up. Well, thanks, Paula, for being my partner
Thanks,
tonight.
Charlie. I think anytime you talk to people about books, even if you've read a lot yourself, you find
Well,
so
as I
many
did
new
today,
titles.
I found a new title just by going to the library.
that
So,
are enticing.
yeah, that were
Yes.
enticing.
Yes.
So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and yep, it was fun.
Thanks, class of 72.
Yep.